I'm Evelyn Reed, 82, a woman, and at my son's 25th anniversary dinner, I was left without a seat at the table. For hours, I sat alone at the bar while my family celebrated, and when it was all over, they expected me to quietly pay the $4,800 bill. That was the night I learned that a mother's love, at least in my family, came with a price tag I was no longer willing to pay. My life until that evening could have been painted in soft, respectable watercolors. I was the widow of a good man, John Reed, a structural engineer who had built a comfortable life for us brick by brick, girder by girder. We weren't fabulously wealthy, but we were secure. We raised our only son, Robert, with every advantage we could afford and then some. I thought I had raised him to be like his father, sturdy, principled, with a heart as solid as concrete foundations. I was wrong. John's heart was giving, Robert's was simply taking. The signs had been there for years, of course. They were like hairline fractures in the walls of our family home, the one I now lived under the shadow of. I ignored them, papered them over with excuses and the boundless, foolish optimism of a mother. When Robert married Catherine, a woman with expensive tastes and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, the fractures deepened. Catherine didn't just marry my son, she acquired him, and I became a sort of legacy asset that came with the deal, useful but outdated. I remember their 10th anniversary. I had just lost John the year before, and my world still felt tilted on its axis. Robert and Catherine announced they were going on a 2-week tour of Italy to celebrate. "We so deserve it, Evelyn," Catherine had said, her hand on Robert's arm, her rings catching the light. "It's been such a stressful year." I knew Robert's firm had lost a major contract and money was tight, so like a fool I reached for my checkbook. A gift, I had called it. $20,000 should cover it, don't you think? Catherine's eyes had lit up, a flash of pure, unadulterated avarice. Robert just gave me a quick, perfunctory hug and said, "Thanks, Mom, you're the best." They sent me a single postcard from Florence. It had a picture of the Duomo on it. The message was 3 words long: having a blast. Then there was the matter of my house. The sprawling 5-bedroom colonial where John and I had raised Robert, where every corner held a memory. After John passed, it felt cavernous, a museum of a life that was over. Robert and Catherine, then living in a much smaller suburban house with their 2 children, started dropping hints. "This old place must be so much for you to manage alone, Mom," Robert would say. Catherine was more direct. "The school district here is just so much better for Liam and Sophie. It would change their lives." They weren't wrong about the house being too much for me, but the subtext was as subtle as a sledgehammer. They wanted it. So I proposed a solution that felt generous and loving at the time. I would sign the house over to them. I would use a portion of my savings to purchase a small 2-bedroom condominium in a quiet retirement community nearby. It seemed perfect. I would be close enough to see my grandchildren, and they would have the home they dreamed of. The ink was barely dry on the deed when the complaints began. "The property taxes are just staggering, Mom," Robert sighed over the phone one day. "And the roof needs work. We just don't have that kind of cash flow right now." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I ended up paying the property taxes for the first 3 years and wrote them a check for $25,000 for the new roof. I was living in a condo, paying my own mortgage and fees while also paying for the upkeep of the house I had given them. I had become a tenant in my own life story, funding the lives of the new occupants. My grandchildren, Liam and Sophie, were sweet children, but they were being molded by their parents' values. For birthdays and holidays, their requests, channeled through Catherine, became more and more extravagant. An iPad, a designer handbag for a 16-year-old, a trip to a ski resort. "It's what all their friends have, Evelyn," Catherine would explain, her tone suggesting that I wouldn't want my own grandchildren to be social outcasts, would I? So I paid. I paid to maintain my seat at the table, to feel like the matriarch of a family that was slowly but surely treating me like an ATM. Which brings me to their 25th anniversary. A silver anniversary. A milestone that should be celebrated with warmth and genuine affection. When I received the embossed invitation to a dinner at Aria Trattoria, one of the most expensive and exclusive restaurants in the city, I felt a familiar pang of anxiety mixed with a flicker of hope. Maybe this time it would be different. Maybe after 25 years they would finally see me as more than a means to an end. The hope was a stubborn, foolish weed, but it persisted. It was the last time I would ever allow it to grow. The week leading up to the anniversary was a flurry of self-imposed activity. I suppose I was trying to busy myself into a state of optimism. I had my silver gray hair styled. I bought a new dress, a tasteful navy blue sheath that felt elegant without being ostentatious. I spent 2 entire days searching for the perfect gift, a task that felt more like a diplomatic mission than a loving gesture. I knew a check would be seen as impersonal, even though it was likely what they wanted most. Catherine had a habit of accepting my financial gifts with a tight smile, as if I'd handed her a necessary but slightly grubby utility bill. No, this had to be something from the heart, something that said, "I am your mother, I remember." My late husband, John, had been a wonderful man, but not a particularly sentimental one, except for one thing. On our 25th anniversary years ago, he had gifted me a beautiful, delicate silver locket. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was sterling, with intricate filigree work around the edges. Inside, he had placed 2 minuscule photographs, one of him as a young man and one of me on our wedding day. "So you can always keep us close to your heart, Ev," he had whispered. It was my most treasured possession. In a moment of what I can only describe as maternal delusion, I decided to pass it on. I thought perhaps that Catherine would see the significance. She and Robert had reached the same milestone John and I had. This locket wasn't just silver, it was a symbol of enduring love, of a partnership that had weathered storms and found quiet harbors. It was a piece of our family's history, a legacy. I carefully removed my own photos, my heart aching as I looked at John's smiling face. I found a lovely picture of Robert and Catherine from their wedding day. They looked so young, so full of promise. Robert's smile was genuine then, not the strained, polite thing it had become. Catherine looked at him with something that resembled adoration. I took the photo to a specialty shop to have it miniaturized to fit the locket. One side for Robert, one for Catherine. I polished the silver until it gleamed, placed it in a velvet box, and wrapped it in shimmering silver paper with a white silk ribbon. It felt significant. It felt right. On the day of the dinner, a nervous energy buzzed beneath my skin. My little condo felt quiet, too quiet. The silence seemed to amplify my anxieties. What if they didn't like the gift? What if Catherine found it old-fashioned? I pushed the thoughts away. This was a celebration. I would be happy for my son. I drove into the city as dusk settled, the sky turning a bruised purple and orange. Aria Trattoria was located in a restored historic building downtown, its entrance marked by a discreet brass plaque and heavy oak doors. A valet, a young man with a polite smile, took my keys. As I stepped out of my modest sedan, I felt a little out of place among the parade of gleaming German luxury cars lining the curb. Taking a deep breath, I walked through the doors. The interior was even more intimidating. It was a symphony of quiet wealth, dark wood, muted lighting from ornate chandeliers, the soft clinking of silver on porcelain, and the low hum of hushed, important conversations. A hostess with a severe haircut and an iPad greeted me. "Good evening, madam. Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her voice smooth and professional. "Yes," I said, my own voice sounding thin in the opulent space. "I'm here for the Reed anniversary party." I held my beautifully wrapped gift in my hands, clutching it like a shield. She tapped on her screen. "Ah, yes, the Reed party in the Modena room." She gave me a brief, practiced smile. "Right this way." She led me down a short, carpeted hallway, past other diners who glanced up with mild curiosity. My heart was starting to beat a little faster. I could hear the sound of laughter and chatter growing louder as we approached a set of frosted glass doors. The hostess pushed one open and gestured for me to enter. "Enjoy your evening," she murmured before turning and disappearing back into the main dining room. I stepped into the Modena room, and that's when the first discordant note of the evening was struck. The room was beautiful, with a long mahogany table as its centerpiece. It was exquisitely set for about 20 people, with sparkling crystal, heavy silverware, and elaborate floral arrangements. My son, Robert, was standing at the head of the table, laughing at something his brother-in-law was saying. Catherine was nearby, looking radiant in a sequined dress, her hand resting on the shoulder of her sister, Jen. My grandchildren, Liam and Sophie, were there, looking uncomfortable but stylish in their fancy clothes. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole clan was assembled. They all looked up as I entered. For a brief second, the chatter died down, 20 pairs of eyes fixed on me, and in that moment, I scanned the table and realized, with a sudden cold plunge in my stomach, that there was no place for me. The silence in the room lasted only a moment, but it stretched into an eternity for me. It was a heavy, awkward quiet, thick with unspoken questions. I stood frozen in the doorway, the silver-wrapped gift feeling impossibly heavy in my hands. My eyes darted around the table again, desperately searching for a mistake and oversight. There were place cards, elegant little tents of ivory cardstock with names written in flowing calligraphy. Robert, Catherine, Liam, Sophie, Jennifer, Mark, Susan. I saw them all. I did not see Evelyn. I did not see Mom. Robert was the first to speak, his voice booming with a forced, unnatural joviality that did nothing to ease the tension. "Mom, you made it. Come on in, come on in." He gestured vaguely toward the group, but he didn't move from his spot at the head of the table. He didn't come to greet me, to take my coat, to kiss my cheek. I took a hesitant step into the room, my smile feeling stiff and painted on. "Happy anniversary, you too," I said, my voice coming out a little shaky. Catherine offered me a thin smile. "Evelyn, thank you for coming." Her eyes flicked down to the gift in my hands and then back up to my face, her expression unreadable. It was her sister, Jennifer, who broke the spell of politeness with a shard of casual cruelty. Jen had always had a sharp tongue, one she wielded with the precision of a surgeon and the malice of an assassin. She looked from my face to the full table, a smirk playing on her lips. "Oh dear," she said, her voice laced with mock sympathy. "Did we forget a chair? It looks like we're all full up." She let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh well, you can stand, Evelyn. You've kind of drifted from the family anyway, haven't you?" The word struck me with physical force. Drifted from the family. Me, the woman who had funded their vacations, paid for their roof, given them my home. The room erupted in a smattering of uncomfortable laughter. My own son, Robert, chuckled along a weak, strangled sound. He wouldn't meet my eye. He was looking at his shoes, a faint, guilty flush creeping up his neck. My grandchildren, Liam and Sophie, stared at their plates, their faces studies in teenage mortification. They knew it was wrong, but they were powerless, caught in the web of their parents' callousness. No one defended me. No one said, "Jen, that's a horrible thing to say." No one stood up to offer me their seat. They just let her words hang in the air, twisting like a knife. The heat of humiliation crept up my neck, a burning tide of shame. I felt my composure, the elegant facade I had so carefully constructed for the evening, begin to crack. I wanted to turn around, walk out that door, and never look back. But I was frozen by a lifetime of conditioning, a lifetime of being the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, the one who swallowed her own pain to keep the family smiling. That's all right," I stammered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Don't you worry about me. I wouldn't want to be a bother." My voice was a whisper. Catherine, ever the gracious hostess, finally intervened, though not in the way a decent person would. "Don't be silly, Evelyn," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Of course you're not a bother. There's a lovely little bar just outside the room. Why don't you go have a seat there? We'll be in and out. You can still be part of the fun." Part of the fun? The words were absurd. I was being exiled, sent to sit with the coats and purses while they celebrated inside. But what choice did I have? To stand there in the doorway, a monument to their thoughtlessness? to make a scene and confirm Jen's cruel assessment that I had drifted. So I nodded. I gave them a watery, pathetic smile. "That's a wonderful idea, Catherine, thank you." I turned, my back straight, my head held high, and walked out of the Modena room. I didn't set my gift on the table. I took it with me. The main bar area was mostly empty, save for a few quiet businessmen at the far end. I slid onto a tall, cold leather stool, placing the silver-wrapped locket on the polished wood beside me. The bartender, a young man with kind eyes, came over. "What can I get for you, ma'am?" "A glass of water, please," I said, "and perhaps a menu." Through the frosted glass doors of the private room, I could see their silhouettes moving and hear the muffled roar of their laughter. They had already forgotten me. The brief, awkward interruption was over, and the party could now officially begin. I was 82 years old, and I had just been sent to the children's table, only there was no table. There was just me, alone at a bar, staring at a ghost. For the next 2 hours, I sat on that bar stool and watched my own life from a distance. The frosted glass of the Modena room doors acted as a screen, projecting a silent movie of my family's joy. I could see the shapes of them, Robert gesticulating grandly as he told a story, Catherine tilting her head back to laugh, Jen leaning in to share some wicked piece of gossip. They were a tableau of familial bliss, and I was on the outside, looking in through a distorted lens. The bartender brought my water with a small, complimentary bowl of olives. He seemed to understand my situation without a word being said. He kept his distance but would occasionally glance over with a look of quiet sympathy. I was grateful for his discretion. I felt fragile, as if a single kind word might shatter me completely. I ordered a glass of Chardonnay, something to do with my hands, something to occupy the space in front of me. I nursed it slowly, the cool liquid a small comfort against the fire of shame burning in my chest. I tried to reason with myself, to find a logical explanation for their behavior. Maybe it was a genuine mistake. Maybe the restaurant had miscounted. But even as I formed the thoughts, I knew they were lies. This was not an oversight. This was a statement. I was an afterthought, an obligation, a checkbook they kept in a dusty drawer and only pulled out when needed. The most painful part was the cake. About an hour into my vigil, a waiter wheeled a large, 3-tiered anniversary cake into the Modena room. The frosted doors swung open for a moment, and a blast of warm, celebratory air and laughter washed over me. I saw the cake, adorned with silver frosting and a glittering 25. I saw them gather around the table, Robert and Catherine standing in the center, my grandchildren Liam and Sophie on either side of them. Phones were raised, flashes illuminated their smiling faces. They posed for group photos, arms around each other, a perfect, happy family. They didn't call for me. It never occurred to a single one of them to say, "Wait, where's Mom? We can't take the picture without her." I was 10 feet away. A simple gesture, a single word would have been enough to pull me back into the fold, but it never came. I watched them cut the cake, feed each other a bite in that silly, romantic tradition, and then pass slices around the table. I watched them laugh and eat and celebrate, and I felt a loneliness so profound it was like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I thought of John. What would he have said if he could see this? John, who had adored Robert but was never blind to his flaws, he would have been appalled. He would have walked into that room, his presence quiet but immense, and fixed Robert with a look of such profound disappointment that my son would have withered. But John was gone, and his strength was gone with him. I was all that was left, and I had become weak, pliant, and worst of all, invisible. My mind drifted back through the years, replaying every check I'd written, every sacrifice I'd made, every time I'd bitten my tongue to keep the peace. I saw it all now not as generosity, but as a series of desperate payments to purchase their affection. And it hadn't worked. All my investment had yielded was this: a solitary seat at a bar, a glass of wine, and a front row view of my own obsolescence. The party inside began to wind down. The laughter became less frequent, the chatter softer. People started to emerge from the Modena room in small groups, collecting their coats, saying their goodbyes. They walked past me, some offering a brief, awkward nod, others avoiding my gaze entirely. They knew. They had all witnessed my humiliation, and their discomfort was a mirror of my own shame. Finally, Robert, Catherine, and Jen emerged, along with my grandchildren. Catherine was holding a stack of gifts. Robert looked flushed from wine and self-satisfaction. They walked right past me toward the exit. "Mom, you still here?" Robert said, as if surprised. "We're heading out, just need to settle up." He didn't wait for my reply, he just strode toward the front desk where the hostess stood. I watched them go, a numb coldness spreading through me. I took a final sip of my wine. The gift, the silver locket I had so lovingly prepared, was still sitting on the bar, its wrapping paper mocking me with its festive shine. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, and felt nothing. The sentiment, the history, the love I had tried to pour into it, it had all evaporated in the cold reality of this evening. I was just an old woman with a useless trinket. That's when the restaurant manager, a tall man with a somber suit and a professional demeanor, approached me. He wasn't smiling. He held a leather bill folder in his hand. "Mrs. Reed?" he asked, his voice low and formal. "Yes," I said, my heart giving a sudden, fearful lurch. He opened the folder and placed it on the bar in front of me. "Your son, Mr. Reed, said you would be covering the bill for the celebration this evening." I looked down. Inside the folder was a long, itemized receipt. I saw the charges for the private room, endless bottles of expensive wine, the appetizers, the main courses, the desserts, the custom cake. And at the bottom, in stark, unforgiving numbers, was the total: $4,837.52. The number stared up at me from the page, $4,837.52. It wasn't just a number, it was a verdict. It was the precise monetary value of my humiliation. For nearly $5,000, I had purchased an evening of being ignored, insulted, and forgot. For a moment, the air left my lungs. The manager stood waiting, his expression patient but expectant. I could feel the bartender's eyes on me, see the reflection of my own shocked face in the polished bar top. In that instant, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a loud, dramatic snap, but a quiet, seismic break. The years of accumulated hurt, the thousands of tiny cuts, the constant, gnawing feeling of being taken for granted, it all coalesced into a single point of cold, hard clarity. The grief and shame that had been choking me for hours suddenly receded, replaced by a feeling I hadn't felt in a very long time: anger. Not a hot, messy rage, but a calm, glacial fury. They hadn't just forgotten my seat. They hadn't just made a cruel joke. They hadn't just excluded me from their celebration. This entire evening had been a setup. They had invited me to this obscenely expensive restaurant with the full intention of having me pay for their party. The humiliation wasn't a byproduct of their thoughtlessness. It was part of the transaction. They had to invite me to get my money, but they didn't have to treat me with respect. I was not a guest of honor. I was the sponsor. I looked up from the bill and met the manager's gaze. My hand, which had been trembling slightly, was now perfectly steady. The watery, weak woman who had shuffled out of that room 2 hours ago was gone. In her place was someone else, someone I vaguely recognized from a long time ago. It was the woman who had stood by John, who had managed a household, raised a son, and faced the world with her chin up. It was me. I slowly closed the leather folder. I pushed it gently back across the bar toward him. I looked him directly in the eye, and a calm I hadn't known I possessed settled over me. "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice even and clear. "It seems I've left my wallet in the car." The manager's professional facade flickered for a second. "Ma'am." I gave him a small, tight smile. "The valet has my keys, I'll just be a moment." I slid off the bar stool, my movements deliberate and unhurried. I picked up my purse. I also picked up the silver-wrapped gift. I was not leaving that behind. It was mine. The history was mine. The love it represented, however tarnished, was mine. I turned and walked toward the heavy oak doors of the entrance. I didn't run. I didn't scurry. I walked with the measured pace of a woman who knew exactly where she was going. As I reached the door, I could hear a commotion behind me, a sharp, panicked voice. It was Catherine. "What do you mean she's gone to her car? Robert, go stop her." And then my son's voice, laced with irritation and confusion. "Mom, what are you doing?" I didn't turn around. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the cool night air. The valet, seeing me emerge, immediately trotted off to retrieve my car. And then I heard it, a sound that would echo in my memory forever. It was my daughter-in-law's voice, rising into a shrill, hysterical shriek that cut through the polite ambience of the restaurant's entrance. "Who's paying now?" The valet pulled up in my modest sedan. He held the door open for me. I got in, placed the gift on the passenger seat, and looked at the young man. "Thank you so much," I said, and I pressed a $50 bill into his hand. His eyes widened. "Ma'am, this is too much." "No," I said, a real smile finally touching my lips. "It's exactly right." I pulled away from the curb, not daring to look in my rearview mirror. I drove through the glittering city streets, the traffic lights blurring through the tears that were now streaming down my face. But these were not the tears of a victim. They were tears of rage, of release, and of a strange, terrifying, and exhilarating freedom. The silence in my car was absolute. The city hummed around me, but inside my small vehicle there was only the sound of my own breathing. When I was a few miles away, safely anonymous on the highway, I pulled my phone out of my purse. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline of the moment beginning to ebb. I scrolled through my contacts, my finger hovering over Robert's name. I deleted it. I deleted Catherine's number, too. Then I found the number I was looking for. Arthur Pendleton. My late husband's best friend and for 40 years our family lawyer, a man as sharp and unyielding as granite. I pressed the call button, praying he was awake. He answered on the second ring, his voice gravelly but alert. "Evelyn, is everything all right? It's nearly midnight." "Arthur," I said, my voice breaking on his name. "I'm sorry to call so late, but I need your help. I think I've just made a terrible mistake." There was a pause on the line, and then his voice came back, firm and reassuring. "Evelyn, knowing your son, I suspect you've just done the first sensible thing you've done in 20 years. Tell me everything." And so I did. I talked, and Arthur listened. I poured out the whole sordid story of the evening, the non-existent chair, Jen's cruel remark, the silent movie of their celebration, and the final, stunning blow of the $4,800 bill. I spoke through tears and fits of anger, the words tumbling out of me in a torrent of pent-up frustration. Arthur didn't interrupt. He just let me speak until I had nothing left to say. The silence that followed was not empty, it was filled with his unspoken support. "Well," he finally said, his voice a low rumble of controlled fury. "It took them long enough to finally show you who they are. I'm only sorry it had to be so brutal." "What do I do, Arthur?" I whispered. "They'll be calling, they'll come to my house. Catherine, you should have heard her." "I can imagine," he said grimly. "And here is what you are going to do, Evelyn. First, you are going to finish your drive home, lock your door, and make yourself a cup of tea. Second, you are going to turn off your phone, not on silent, off. I don't want you to even see their calls and messages tonight. Let them stew in the mess they've made. Third, you are going to get a good night's sleep, knowing that you are finally in control. And then And then, tomorrow morning you will come to my office at 10 o'clock sharp. We will turn your phone back on together and we will formulate a plan. They have drawn a line in the sand, Evelyn. It's time we drew one of our own. His decisiveness was a balm on my raw nerves. For the first time in years, I wasn't alone in this fight. I did exactly as he said. I went home to my quiet condo, locked the door, and turned off my phone. The silence was blissful. That night I slept more soundly than I had in years. The next morning I felt a strange mix of dread and resolve. I dressed carefully, choosing a smart tweed blazer that had always made me feel capable. In my purse I placed the still-wrapped gift. At Arthur's office, his secretary, a kind woman named Mrs. Gable, greeted me with a warm smile and led me straight into his library. Arthur stood to greet me. He was 84, but he stood as straight as a man of 50. He was wearing a three-piece suit, his silver hair neatly combed. The office itself was a fortress of law and order, lined with floor-to-ceiling books, the air smelling of old paper and leather. "Evelyn," he said, taking my hand, "you look like you've been through a war." "I feel like I've just declared one," I replied. He gestured for me to sit in a plush leather armchair opposite his massive mahogany desk. "Good, now let's see what the enemy is up to." He nodded toward my purse. "The phone, if you please." With trembling hands, I retrieved my phone and powered it on. The screen lit up and then it began to vibrate, a frantic, buzzing seizure as a deluge of notifications flooded in. It went on for nearly a full minute. There were 37 missed calls. 22 from Robert, 15 from Catherine, and over 50 text messages. "Let's start with the texts, shall we?" Arthur said, leaning forward. "Read them aloud. Let's get the full flavor of their panic." I opened the first message from Robert, sent shortly after I had driven away the night before. "Mom, where are you? This isn't funny." "Mom, the restaurant is holding us here. You have to come back and pay." "Mom, answer me. What the hell do you think you're doing?" Catherine's were more direct and far more venomous. "I cannot believe you would do this to us on our anniversary. You have humiliated this entire family. We had to put the bill on our credit card. It's maxed out now. I hope you're happy, Evelyn. You are a selfish, spiteful old woman. After everything we've done for you." After everything we've done for you, the audacity of that statement was breathtaking. Arthur let out a short, harsh laugh. "Incredible, the victimhood is palpable." The messages became more desperate as the night wore on, then shifted in tone this morning. They had clearly conferred and decided on a new strategy. "Robert, Mom, look, I think we all got off on the wrong foot last night. There was a misunderstanding with the seating. We felt terrible about it. Please call me. We're worried about you." "Catherine, Evelyn, Robert is very upset. I'm worried about his stress levels. We love you. We just want to talk this through. I know your feelings were hurt, and for that I am truly sorry." "Ah," Arthur said, steepling his fingers. "The non-apology apology. I'm sorry your feelings were hurt, not I'm sorry for what I did to hurt you." Classic manipulation. We read through all of them, the progression from faux rie to faux concern was a case study in narcissistic behavior. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were terrified of the consequences. They had lost control of their primary source of funding and they were scrambling to get it back. "So," I said, setting the phone down on the desk, "what now?" "Now," Arthur said, a glint in his eye, "we respond, but not to them. I'm going to have Mrs. Gable call the restaurant and settle your bill for the single glass of wine and the water you consumed. I will also have her add a generous tip for that bartender. Then I'm going to draft a letter. It will be sent via courier to their home this afternoon. It will inform Robert and Catherine that any and all future communications regarding financial or legal matters are to be directed to my office. And it will invite them to a meeting here on Friday morning at 10 o'clock. A meeting, my stomach twisted. Arthur, I don't think I can face them. You won't be alone, he said, his voice firm. You will be here with me on your home turf. They are the ones who will be uncomfortable. Trust me, Evelyn, it's time to set new terms and conditions for Reed Family Incorporated. He paused and looked at the silver gift I had placed on the corner of his desk. What's in the box? Their anniversary gift, I said quietly. May I? He asked. I nodded. He carefully untied the ribbon and opened the box. He looked at the silver locket, at the tiny photos of a young Robert and Catherine inside. He was silent for a long moment. This is a beautiful sentiment, Evelyn. He closed the box. And it is far more than they deserve. The 3 days leading up to the Friday meeting were the quietest of my life. On Arthur's advice, I kept my phone off. I read books, I tended to the small garden on my balcony, and I took long walks around my community. It felt like holding my breath, waiting for a storm to either break or pass. A part of me expected them to defy Arthur's letter and simply show up at my door, but they didn't. The silence was telling. They were afraid of the lawyer. On Friday morning, I met Arthur at his office an hour before the scheduled meeting. He had me sit with him in the library while we drank coffee, and he coached me. They will try to make you feel guilty, Evelyn, he said, his eyes serious. They will talk about family, about love, about how much you've hurt them. Your only job is to remain calm. You are not here to argue about the past. You are here to dictate the future. Let me do most of the talking. When you speak, be brief, be firm, and do not apologize for anything. You have nothing to apologize for. At precisely 10 o'clock, Mrs. Gable buzzed on the intercom. Mr. and Mrs. Reed are here. Send them in, Arthur said. They entered the library, and the change in their demeanor was shocking. Gone was the swagger and entitlement. Robert looked pale and haggard, his suit seeming a size too big for him. Catherine's face was tight with barely suppressed rage, her expensive dress looking out of place in the somber, wood-paneled room. They looked like children called to the principal's office. They stopped just inside the door, their eyes fixing on me. I was seated in the armchair, Arthur in his large chair behind the desk. We were a united front. The power dynamic had been completely inverted. Mom, Robert began, his voice strained. Sit down, Robert, Arthur said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He gestured to the two smaller chairs facing his desk. They sat perched on the edge of the seats like nervous birds. Thank you for coming, Arthur began, his voice cool and formal. We are here today to discuss the future of Evelyn's financial relationship with you, but before we do that, I believe you have something you wish to say to your mother. Catherine shot a poisonous glare at Arthur before turning a practiced, sorrowful expression on me. Evelyn, she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. We are so sorry. That night was a terrible mistake. The seating was a mix-up with the restaurant and things just spiraled. We never ever intended for you to feel excluded. Robert nodded eagerly. She's right, Mom. It was a disaster. We should have handled it better. We were just so caught up in the moment. We love you. You're my mother. Of course there was a seat for you in our hearts, even if there wasn't one at the table. A seat in your hearts. The empty, saccharine phrase almost made me laugh. I looked at my son, at this 55-year-old man making pathetic excuses, and I felt nothing but a profound, hollow sadness. The love I had felt for him was still there, a vestigial ache like a phantom limb, but it was overshadowed by this vast disappointment. I looked at Arthur. He gave me a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was my turn. I took a deep breath. The seating was not a misunderstanding, I said, my voice steady and clear. It was a choice. You chose to humiliate me. You chose tea. Oh, ignore me. And you chose to present me with a bill for nearly $5,000 for the privilege. That was the manager, Catherine protested. He got it wrong. We were going to contribute. No, I said, cutting her off. You were not. This is not up for debate. I am not here to listen to your excuses. I am here, as Arthur said, to tell you how things will be from now on. I let that hang in the air. Robert and Catherine stared at me, their masks of contrition slipping to reveal the shock and anger beneath. They had never heard me speak this way. Arthur took over. To be precise, he said, opening a file on his desk, Evelyn's financial support of your household, which has included, but is not limited to, paying property taxes on a home she gifted to you, funding home repairs, and underwriting numerous vacations and luxury purchases, is terminated, effective immediately. Catherine gasped. You can't do that house. We have expenses, the children. Your expenses, Arthur continued smoothly, are now your own. Furthermore, Evelyn will be placing her condominium in a trust with any and all decisions regarding its potential sale or transfer to be managed by me. You will not inherit it automatically. As for the family home you currently occupy, Evelyn is relinquishing all moral and financial responsibility for it. She gave you the house. What you do with it is your problem. Robert finally found his voice. Mom, this is insane. We're family. Family, I said, my voice quiet but firm, does not leave their 82-year-old mother to stand in a hallway. Family does not laugh when she is insulted. Family does not treat her like a walking wallet. I stood up then, my legs feeling strong beneath me. I walked over to the desk and picked up the silver-wrapped gift. I held it out to them. This was your anniversary present, I said. It was my most treasured possession from your father, a locket for your 25th year together. I pulled my hand back. But I realize now that you don't value things from the heart. You only value things with a price tag, so I'm keeping it. Consider its value a down payment on the dignity you tried to take from me. I placed the locket back on the desk, turned to Arthur and said, I think we're done here. I walked out of the library, head held high, without a backward glance. I didn't need to hear their sputtering protests or their furious arguments. I left them in Arthur's capable hands. As I walked down the hallway, I felt a lightness in my chest, as if a great weight had been lifted. The war wasn't over, but the most important battle had been won. I had chosen myself. That was almost a year ago. I have not spoken to Robert or Catherine since that day in Arthur's office. I hear through the grapevine that they had to sell the big house and move into a smaller one. I hear they are struggling. A part of me feels a flicker of sadness for the son I once knew, but it's quickly replaced by a sense of peace. My life is quiet now. It is my own. The silver locket sits on my dresser, not as a reminder of them, but as a reminder of John's love and of the love I finally learned to show myself. I learned that you can give a person everything you have, but you cannot make them value it. You cannot buy respect, and you cannot purchase love. True worth isn't found in what you give to others, it's found in what you refuse to let them take from you. It's found in the moment you decide to stand up, finish your drink, and walk away from a table where you are not welcome.